This episode is brought to you by the Wholesome Fertility Method online program. This program includes video courses on understanding Chinese medicine patterns and how this reflects on cycle charting. It also includes foods shown to benefit fertility health, which products to avoid, supplements and herbs that are shown to improve sperm and egg quality, acupressure points, and essential oil recipes to optimize fertility health, mindfulness, breathing exercises, and much, much more. I'm providing a second round of spots, which include live coaching calls with the program for a limited time. To find out more, visit www.thewholesomefertilitymethod.com. Episode number 39 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Dr. Janetti Marotta. Dr. Marotta is a psychologist who has specialized in every area of infertility since 1990. She is the author of A Fertile Path, Guiding the Journey with Mindfulness and Compassion. Dr. Marotta is a graduate of Yale University and the University of Nevada, Reno, who has served on the Regional Board of Resolve, the National Infertility Organization, worked as a staff psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford University, and founded the Fertility Support and Mindfulness Program at Palo Alto Medical Foundation Fertility Physicians. Dr. Marotta is a longtime practitioner of meditation and mindfulness and also authored the book 50 Mindful Steps to Self-Esteem, Everyday Practices for Cultivating Self-Acceptance and Self-Compassion. So welcome to the podcast, Janetti.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's so wonderful being on your podcast.
So you have quite an impressive background in psychology and have dedicated much of your life to this study. Can you share what led you to specialize in fertility as well as mindfulness?
Sure. Well, it was really born from my personal experience. I was actually specializing in drug and alcohol. I was at Stanford Psychiatry Department. And during that time, my husband and I had just gotten remarried, and we wanted to have a child together. Mm-hmm. And we ran into what turned out to be about 6 years of infertility. And that was repeated miscarriage. We tried IVF. I was in the kind of the original donor IVF pool. So this is going back almost 30 years ago at this point. So we had donor IVF with my sister and then a matched donor at USC. We tried adoption for a couple of years, and then finally surrogacy is what worked. So my daughter just this last week turned 25.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And what a tumultuous road that was. And what happened was that it was such a personal crisis for me. And I just really tried everything to be okay. And it was actually my work working in the field of drug and alcohol where, I really saw tremendous change in my patients because they put recovery first and they really recognized the need to have to, to say that I have a problem and I really need to do something about this and change their life around. And so I applied that to myself and eventually ended up leaving the psychiatry department because just too much was happening. And I devoted a lot of time to therapy. I became a Vision Quest guide, going out into the wilderness, seeking your vision to for health and healing. I went into acupuncture, had an acupuncture exorcism, which I haven't heard about since.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
You have. Went to a Buddhist endo and then a Christian church, and then I finally found this East-West path, and that was just right for me. It was a combination of meditation and yoga, and just a way of seeing life that really spoke to turning things from the inside out. Really developing who I was fully as a person, and led to this pilgrimage to India, and where I really understood that if I stayed open to possibility and I developed trust in myself, that I would have a child. And when I returned home, my husband met me at the airport with a pillow under his shirt, meaning that our surrogate was pregnant. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So that was, that happened. We were doing our fifth artificial insemination attempt. And that was the one, when I was gone, that worked. My husband
Wow. Oh my God,
flew
I
down
just got the
to,
chills.
yeah, it was pretty amazing. And so, from that experience, I decided to develop, after my daughter was born, develop a specialty in infertility. I started my private practice. I started volunteering for Resolve, the National Infertility Organization. Got on their board for several years in the Bay Area, the regional board, and then hooked up with other fertility clinics and started a mind-body program, and found mindfulness along the way. And I found mindfulness to be really like the perfect antidote to deal with the challenges of infertility. So I developed a mindfulness practice of my own, and then put a lot of the teachings and the practices from mindfulness into this program, where it was an 8-week program, working with primarily women in groups, but I also work with people individually and couples in my private practice. And that program is really, in many ways, how I work with people, bringing mindfulness into all of the challenges that infertility presents.
That's amazing. I love mindfulness. It's just, I feel like it brings the power back into your hands because,
Yeah,
and it takes you from a reactive to a much more proactive state of mind.
uh, absolutely. I really fit into the same place that everybody who I've worked with over the last 25 years at this point falls into, which is just a real devastation. I mean, just an overwhelm of all of the thoughts and the feelings that go with what's considered a major life crisis, because every area of your life is impacted. And for the most part, the way that people cope doesn't work, and that's trying harder to succeed. And what
Right.
happens with infertility is that you don't have any control over the outcome, even if you do everything perfectly, right. Whether or not the IVF or the pregnancy works out is really outside of your control.
Right.
So mindfulness is that, it's process. It's not the outcome. It's looking at not trying to change the situation, but how you relate to it, and looking at how you're um, how you're holding on to what's happening in a way that really gets in the way and makes what's already an incredibly difficult situation that much harder.
Right. And so take us through maybe an example of a couple that comes in and what their state of mind is at that point and how through the program that transforms and I guess the process of which they start to get into a different perspective.
Sure. Well, really, the first thing I do is I ask people, what brings them here, about their infertility history, and then I really think it's so important to look back beyond the fertility history.
Mm-hmm.
because so much takes place of kind of what you're bringing with you. And then I really make it known that even though what they're saying is they're having an extremely difficult time. Um, Oftentimes, the woman is just feeling that they're overwhelmed by their emotions and can't stop thinking about things, and life is on hold, and it's impacting their career, their relationships, and then the couple is talking about how hard this is on them. I really make it known that this is normal, and
Right.
it's normal because this is a real major life stressor, um, and so kind of having them know that they're not alone,
Mm-hmm.
that this is how people react when something this profound occurs, um, is really the first kind of thing that's important for them to hold on to, and I think gives them permission to then open up and really talk about all of the difficulty and how this is striking them at such a personal level. And then then they'll talk about what's happening, the dynamics of their relationship. How is this impacting your life as a couple? And what I find is that, and this is not only in my office, but all the groups that I've done, and I've done groups now really over 20 years, 10 years for Resolve, over 10 years through this medical practice and other venues. And so what I find is that, and this is also what I've read in the literature, that that men and women tend to take infertility personally rather than understanding it to be a medical condition, and
Right.
so they really see it like as a definition of themselves. And this has
Right.
to do with our conditioning. For men, virility is equated with masculinity. Womanhood is equated with motherhood. And when what feels like that basic part of yourself that's supposed to manifest into helping you become a full man or a woman isn't happening, then your self-esteem is just absolutely threatened to the core. And typically gender specific roles tend to take place. So again, this is a total generalization, and I certainly see differences, but oftentimes men will end up constricting their emotions and trying to focus on solving the problem. Women will
Mm-hmm.
feel overwhelmed by the emotions and want to talk about the problem, and they get on opposite sides. Um,
Right.
and so women don't feel like that their partner is really like understanding and invested enough, and that they tend to be sort of behind where the woman is, who's taking a lot of like charge over the situation, and they're just trying to kind of just figure out what's going on. And men feel pretty oftentimes inadequate and unappreciated. They and basically misunderstood. And so these differences are causing them to really not be able to be there for one another and end up pushing each other away. And so, again, I talk about how this is really just pretty darn normal.
Right.
It's, again, a natural reaction to this situation that tends to bring this out in people. Again, many differences, but generally speaking, this is what I'll find. And so then it's about how to really appreciate what men are doing in terms of focusing on the solutions and looking for like what we can do about this, and for men to open up and talk more emotionally and just be able to listen, not necessarily try to fix the situation.
Right.
So so it's a lot of just understanding where each other is coming from, knowing how to be more present for one another, And then, developing these tools. I certainly bring mindfulness into it, but how they can regain their sexual relationship, because that always, I 95% of the time at least, that gets really impacted. Um,
Yeah.
his infertility is associated with reproduction, and then if you just open up sexually, you become really vulnerable, and it just becomes such a painful interaction, and that's so much what had been a part of what brings you together. So how to reconnect, and how to also take breaks, how they can perhaps join a support group and meet with other couples who are experiencing the same thing. I'll give them my book, which is like this. Basically, it's a step-by-step program which they could do as a couple together or alone, individually. So there's a lot of tools and kind of ways that they can work together as a couple.
It's interesting, just really interesting as you're talking, and I'm thinking to myself, like, it's not their fault, because it's just built differently. But yet, because they're built differently, it seems like since they speak different languages, that doing, they're not supporting each other. And I find it very fascinating how men and women are built so differently. And it's almost like a different language.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, years ago there was that book that was really
Right.
popular, John Gray, Men Are from Mars, Women
Yeah.
Are, yeah. And he was saying, in order for men to be emotionally, they want to be sexual first, and in order for women to be sexually, they want to be kind of like talk emotionally first.
Right.
And what is this? Some kind of a cosmic joke? And um, because of well, mindfulness is under the whole rubric of mind body medicine, and I think of mind body as very kind of yin yang, looking at
Right.
both the masculine and the feminine within yourself, and there's creating that balance within yourself, and not looking so much for the other person to be like you, but
Right.
for
Yeah.
each person to be whole and complete within themselves.
Right. And it's another thing that I find is so interesting is that it is well, I've heard that it's being compared to PTSD, that it is that people get PTSD from this experience, that it's that traumatic.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree. Yeah, I've certainly heard the same thing, that PTSD would be an applicable diagnosis, because there is a tremendous a lot of amount of trauma.
Yeah, and I think that it must be very healing, like, to get that validation when you're going through it, and then to finally get validation, because I imagine that you go through this and then you blame yourself or you question, why am I reacting this way? And I bet, just that first step of hearing everything that you're going through is normal must be so comforting to so many people.
It is, and what I find whenever I'll be doing a group, or when anyone talks to someone else experiencing a fertility challenge, and hearing that they're feeling the same way, because it still surprises me, even though I've been doing this work for so long, how kind of universal, at least in this country, this what happens, that
Yeah.
just the commonality in how people are reacting and how they're
Yeah.
doing as a couple, is really pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, definitely. And then another thing is, that came to mind as you were talking is that when people do go through challenges in life, a lot of times the first thing you want to do is control it.
Exactly.
It's kind of like
Right.
an innate response. It's kind of a human reaction.
Uh huh. Uh huh. Well, that's why I love mindfulness so much, because it uses awareness rather than control. So,
Yeah.
yeah, infertility, there's just, it really puts us into this place of needing to, uh, it's an out of control situation. Treatment is also, like IVF in particular, has been equated with being like a roller coaster ride. And
Yeah.
so the more out of control you get, the more the tendency is to control, and that
Right.
only exacerbates
Right.
the loss of control. So
Right.
mindfulness just takes you out of that whole way of being in the situation. And so it just uses awareness to be with what's happening. And again, it's not trying to change the situation, which is our natural compulsion to get rid of infertility. And what we find in mindfulness is the more you resist persists. And
Oh,
so it's,
absolutely. I completely agree with that. And it's just, I think if you live long enough, you start to see that in
mm-hmm,
general and
uh-huh,
everything in life. And what's interesting is, it's such an antidote, mindfulness, because the two things at least that I see is you want to control, that's the number one, but you also judge, you like to label because it puts it somewhere. And that judgment could be applied to yourself and what should be and what shouldn't be, and mindfulness is the complete antidote, complete opposite of both of those things.
yeah. So that's what when I found mindfulness, it was like, oh, this is exactly what's needed, because there's uh, there's what happens with infertility is that with this control, awareness is brought in with mindfulness to just look at how you're relating to the situation, not trying to get rid of the fertility challenge, but look at how to work with the guilt, how to work with
Hmm.
this self recrimination, the anxiety that goes with it. Infertility also, especially with the monthly cycles, it puts you into this past past regret and future worry and fear. And so mindfulness is all about living in the present, or trying to know that the only place that really is where you have your strength and where your options are is in the present. And there's nothing like infertility that's just squeezes the present thin. So it just opens up your life so that you can kind of have it back again. Um,
Hmm.
and then, like what you were talking about, uh, there's just this tendency to personalize what's happening, and we do this in life anyway. Um, there's something happens, and then we believe that, oh, it's our fault, or
Hmm.
it's happening to ourselves, as opposed to it's just this situation that has occurred. And
Right.
so mindfulness helps us to not personalize experience, and know that just keep our attention at this neutral place, and that's
Right.
a huge relief.
Yeah.
Another thing that happens with infertility is that there's this sense of just feeling broken. And then, like what we're talking about, this compulsion to try to fix yourself because you're
Right.
broken. And mindfulness is based on this concept of original goodness, or what they call our true nature or Buddha nature, meaning that we're whole and complete already with our
Mm.
inadequacies and imperfections and insecurities. And so recognizing our true nature really helps us to stop trying to keep correcting, and being in this sort of endless pursuit of being okay. And mindfulness, and this is also what I love about compassion. And compassion is very much about knowing about our common humanity, that we all suffer, and nobody's perfect. And
Right.
so just believing that you're part of the world rather than sort of like me versus them. And it can really help to get out of this comparison with, especially what's difficult is comparing ourselves with other pregnant women, and just everybody else getting pregnant, and what's happening here. And then the last thing that I love about mindfulness is this ability to to look rather than on the outside, but on the inside, and cultivate the qualities of like trust and non-judgment and patience and perseverance, so that we can really stop looking at the outside, stop looking at trying to change the infertility, and rather look at who am I as a whole person. And like what we were talking about before, it's when you don't try so hard, that's
Mm-hmm.
when things start really beginning to happen.
Right. And then you tend to find with more clarity your best path, really.
Yeah, because you're open and undefended, and you're able to see what your options are, rather than
Right.
getting kind of mired and stuck in them.
Absolutely. And so we're speaking of mindfulness. Obviously there's going to be maybe somebody that's listening that may not know anything about mindfulness and may think it's only meditation or only a state of mind. So do you want to go more into detail on especially how you implement that and how you get people on board? Is it through meditation or is it through just I'm sure it's both. But I just wanted to allow you to share that so that if somebody's listening that's never heard of mindfulness or what it is, they
Sure.
can get a better idea of it.
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a lot of different definitions of mindfulness. There's one by James Barris. Um, and what he says is mindfulness is simply being aware of what's happening right now without wishing it were different. So enjoying the pleasant without holding on when it changes, which it will, and being
Hmm.
with the unpleasant without fearing it will always be this way, which it won't.
Right.
So basically, it's about being in the present moment with unconditional acceptance.
Mm.
I like to look at it as kind of the way that we walk around in life is having this lens of judgment. Um,
Hmm.
it's like, kind of having these glasses on. And so something happens and we categorize into, I like this, I don't like this. What's happening is good, it's bad, this is a success, it's a failure. And so we, like in that definition, we tend to cling to what we want and reject what we don't want. And
Right.
basically, we just wish that things were different. Um,
Hmm.
so, something that I really like to explain, and maybe not necessarily right away, but that according to the Buddha, there's the three realities or the three truths of being. And the first truth is that life is difficult. It's also said that life is suffering or life is inherently dissatisfying.
Hmm.
Um, but we kind of grow up in this kind of belief that life should be like a kind of a Shangri-La. And it's just this, so we're sick and like, oh, I wish I wasn't sick. And oh, we were handed vanilla ice cream when we wanted chocolate ice cream. And I mean, it's just so incessant, all the dissatisfactions, the small and the really big things also that happen in life, that life is inherently difficult. Um,
Right.
and so mindfulness with this more neutral lens that allows us to see how judgment is getting in the way, how
Right.
judgment is, one of the things that said there's unavoidable suffering, but then there's the avoidable suffering, and it's how we add to it. And so
Right.
it's
Right.
the
Right.
judgment, and then the way that we resist what's happening. And so mindfulness just teaches us how to, like, oh, if we're resisting what's occurring, and looking at infertility, this is a huge resistance, and it's understandable that nobody wants this to be happening. But
Right.
the way that we're resisting it in the form of like feeling that it's our fault, being guilty, um, uh, being, wishing it would go away, this is adding to the suffering.
Right. It's
So
the story that we tell ourselves about it. I always like to compare it to like there's the first insult, which is just whatever happened that wasn't positive, and the second insult is when we keep ourselves in that suffering, or what we tell ourselves about that may not be, that may keep us in that state of suffering.
absolutely, there. I don't know if you've heard the story of Buddha and the three arrows, but Buddha says to his students, what happens when an arrow strikes you? And they say, oh, that's terrible. What about a second arrow? Oh, that's so much worse. The third arrow, oh, it's horrible, horrible. And Buddha says the first arrow is life happening. It's the unavoidable suffering. But the second
Hmm.
arrow is, oh, why didn't I move away? The third arrow
Hmm.
is, oh, I'll never be able to walk again. Will be able to support my family. And it's how we add to our suffering with the thoughts about what's occurred.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
that
just to clarify, this isn't even though this Buddha, we always say like Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. It's not necessarily the religion. It's teaching. So if somebody's hearing it, they may think it's a religious thing, but it's not a religious thing. It's a teaching.
thanks, Michelle. Sometimes I get concerned about like these Buddha stories, but another one is someone says to the Buddha, Buddha, are you God? And Buddha says, no, I'm awake. And yeah,
Hmm.
it's there is. We're not talking about a religion here. We're talking about a path or practices or ways of seeing how life can be um, framed in this
Right.
way that takes the judgment out of it. So that's just basically it's looking at these teachings and practices that help us remove the judgment from the way that we're experiencing life. Um,
Yes.
and so the other two things that I like to talk about with these the truths of reality is this. The second one is that everything is impermanent. The only thing that's permanent is impermanence, and so that everything changes, and that's also a relief because people do feel like infertility is going to like last forever, but it's kind of holding on to the belief that all things shall pass, all things shall pass. And then
Right. Right.
the third truth is that we tend to personalize life and kind of see it through the frame of me, mine, and I, or the personal ego, um,
Hmm.
which is thought of to be sort of like assumptions and beliefs about ourselves. So something happens and it's like, oh, this is happening to me. But mindfulness helps us depersonalize and put on this neutral lens so that we can much more easily see what's happening out of this space of kind of neutrality and not take it as like a personal kind of
Right.
insult or just this huge defect in ourselves.
Right. Right. Exactly. And and so when you implement this with your clients, your patients, you talk to them about how to approach it in the waking state, but do you also talk about meditation or certain practices that they could do?
Yeah, so kind of once I've sort of just laid the groundwork for what mindfulness is, then and at some point, more in kind of the I don't really get into how we get stuck into this place of dissatisfaction and feeling like things are permanent and how we personalize that kind of comes the into the process. Um, but the first thing is kind of knowing how to self-soothe.
Hmm.
And the first practice that I'll bring in is the breath. So so often people will just feel incredibly anxious, and the anxiety will is what makes the situation one of the things that makes the situation worse. So I'll teach
Hmm.
abdominal breathing, and that's how to turn off the stress response and how to turn on the relaxation response with getting the breath all the way down into the abdomen. And if you're breathing from your abdomen, you can't feel anxious, because this will cool down the nervous system. So I'll teach this meditation to just help them learn how to do abdominal breathing. I'll have people lie on the floor, because it's much easier to kind of feel the belly move up and down as you breathe in. Like it's filling like a balloon, and then breathing out, it's emptying, and kind of feel the waves of the breath, just like you're on a beach and hearing the waves going in and out. And then I'll give practices. So one of them is I give out these little hearts, these little felt hearts, and I call it the felt practice. Felt being the acronym for feel every living touch. And I'll say, just through the day, just remember to take 2 or 3 deep abdominal breaths. And then I'll, so what I want them to get into doing is shifting from conditioned chest breathing, which keeps you into kind of a low grade alert mode, and into this relaxed state. So then the first practice is the meditation on the breath. And this is learning how to just have your object of meditation being the breath. And so you're focusing on the breath by just feeling the breath waves in the body. And then whenever the mind wanders, you just make a mental note thinking, and then return to the breath. So it's this very simple practice, but there's so much that's happening. So every time you come back to the breath, you're practicing non-judgment, because the mind has wandered, but you just make this mental note thinking. And if you notice that you're judging, you just say, okay, judgment, and just come back. And so you're training the mind to just come back home and be where you want the mind to be, so that you can learn to kind of trust yourself and be where you want to be. And being with the breath anchors us to the present moment. And that's, again, mindfulness is just this non-judgmental, moment-to-moment way of being. So that's the first practice, meditation on the breath. And then we'll look at how to use our body as a way of grounding ourselves. So I'll teach grounding practices. One of them that I learned from mindfulness-based stress reduction. This is a practice by Jon Kabat-Zinn, a program from Jon Kabat-Zinn that he started over 30 years ago. So the STOP practice is an acronym, and it's that stands for S is stop. So you're in a kind of an anxious situation, so you just you notice yourself feeling anxious or worried or whatever it is, and so you say stop. And then the T is take a breath. So you take some deep abdominal breaths, and then the O is observe. And so you observe, okay, what are you thinking? And you don't do anything with your thoughts. You just notice, okay, I'm thinking that the doctor's going to be giving me bad news. And so you just put that to the side. And so observe, what are you feeling? The thoughts and emotions are always connected. And I'm feeling really scared and anxious. And so you just note that. And then you observe, how is this being manifested in the body? And you notice that your shoulders are tight, that your heart is racing. You might imagine breathing into and out from your heart, kind of, again, going into the abdominal breathing. You're tensing your hands and your palms, and so you kind of massage your hands. And so you basically bring your attention into your body, and that's where you do the work. And as this is happening, you're getting out of your thoughts that are only making the situation worse. You're not feeling overwhelmed by your emotions, because all of this is happening where you can actually do something, and that's in your body. And so the P in stop is proceed, and this is so you proceed out of this more kind of relaxed, calm state. So mindfulness is based on a lot of informal practices. Informal meaning practices that we can bring with us during the day, and then the formal practices of the meditation. Um,
Right.
so this is one informal practice: stop, take breath, observe, and proceed. And then again, the formal practice of meditation. So it's meditation on the body. So I'll teach body scan, or how to scan the body and look for points of tension. And the thing about mindfulness is, and this is what we were saying before, which is why it's such a perfect antidote. Our tendency is to control and resist and turn away from what's difficult, kind of run and hide, or or try to, like, cling on to it as though we can actually really change it. And
Right.
but with mindfulness, it's actually turning toward that very thing that we resist, and opening up to it. And
Right.
so um, I oftentimes like to equate it with, like, skiing downhill. That in order to gain our balance, we don't go back, because that will actually have our skis go forward, or we'll slip. But
Mm-hmm.
it's moving. It's kind of leaning forward, and that's how we can regain our balance.
Right. Leaning forward. I like
Yeah.
that. It's true. And the book by Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul.
Oh, yeah,
It's a great book.
yeah,
He just puts it so eloquently about leaning forward and just kind of allowing, and also just the knowledge that, or the awareness that, what we tend to do, we tend to try to avoid painful situations.
yeah. I mean, I would say that that's the biggest thing about mindfulness. It's when we don't resist, when we're able to see, okay, we're judging the situation, we're resisting it with with this thought of, I don't want this, or I do want this. So we take out that judgment. We can look at then opening up with acceptance, and acceptance in
Yeah.
mindfulness is being with it. And so how can we be with it? And so it's looking at, okay, so how do these emotions manifest in our body? And so in this mindfulness of the body practice, we actually practice turning towards that area in the body that's tense. Rather
Right.
than trying to kind of fight against it, we imagine kind of breathing into and out from this point of tension, so that the tension has more space to kind of move around, and possibly kind of fade into the past, or dissipate, or even just simply be. Because what we
Right.
find is acknowledgement by itself is a powerful tool in discharging tension.
Yeah.
um, so mindfulness of the body teaches us how to then do the next step, and that's learning how to work with our thoughts. Um, because it's our thoughts that really get us into trouble, because they create all these stories, and these stories aren't
Right.
true.
Right.
And so the first meditation that we'll get into around thoughts is now that we've learned how to meditate with focusing on the breath, and calming and stabilizing and bringing our attention into the present moment, and then the body, um, feeling grounded to the body, and learning now how to kind of turn toward that things that's distressing. And now with the thoughts, we actually can imagine our thoughts just coming up like clouds in the sky, that they're mental formations. They're not these
Hmm.
definitions. They're not,
Right.
they're not who we are as people. And so we can just sort of see these thoughts and not cling to them. Um, and then we learn how to work with thoughts. And the thing about mindfulness is that mindfulness teaches that the cause for our mental disturbance is the beliefs that we have, and how tightly we hold on to them. And so it's looking at what your beliefs are, and then knowing that these, I am not my thoughts, and I am not my feelings. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's not identifying, and being able to witness thoughts from a neutral perspective.
Right. And we do tend to identify and we rarely investigate our thoughts. And so I think it's just so powerful to just allow ourselves to take a step back. And I always see it like a push and pull. You know, we either really cling on to something or we try to resist it, and it's just that, and that can torment us.
Absolutely. So mindfulness instructs you to ask two fundamental questions. The first one, first set, is what am I resisting? Um,
Hmm.
and so just looking at like, what is the resistance? And then the next question is, how can I open up? So
Right.
it is this push and pull thing. It's this like this contraction and then this opening and actually like one of the things that I talk about in the book is that that and this is certainly what I found during my infertility journey and especially during surrogacy, that infertility itself is a birthing process. And,
Hmm.
giving birth is this series of contractions. It's this shutting down, it's this closing up, it's this tightening, and then it's this opening. And with every closing, you
That's
kind of learn how to
beautiful.
open up more. And that's what happens with mindfulness. You just look at, okay, how am I tightening up? How am I shutting down? How
Hmm.
am I getting in the way? And then every time you resist, then you learn that much more about how can I open up? How can I give
Hmm.
way? How can I accept or be with what's happening? Um,
Right.
and it is this, it really is this birthing process. And I think there's nothing like infertility because it is such a major crisis that then
Right.
becomes an opportunity. And that's one of these Chinese sayings, crisis is an opportunity, that, again, not that you would wish infertility upon yourself, but that it can become an incredible way of changing because we only change when we find that unless we do, we're going to be worse off. and
Right.
you
Right.
know and so I mean and that's what happened with me. I mean, I really it's changed my life. I mean, I'm here right now because of how I was tremendously impacted by
Right.
this crisis, and it opened me up in ways that I never would have.
Right. And you've written two books. I mean, and you've done so much work with thousands of people. And the fact that you're doing this wouldn't be the case had you not gone through what you went through.
Absolutely. And my daughter is from surrogacy.
Hmm.
And so this was traditional surrogacy, meaning it was the egg of the surrogate via intrauterine insemination or artificial insemination, and then my husband's sperm. And so I didn't give birth to her. I don't have the same genetics. But when I look at her, I really know that she came from my heart because
Yeah.
you know, I really gave birth to her, and
Yes.
um,
I've heard stories like that before. I mean, it's amazing.
yeah, and I really I'm not saying anything different than I've heard. So at this point, because I've been doing this work for almost 25 years, it has been thousands of people that however the child comes to you is this is your child. This is the
Mm.
and uh, and you wouldn't. I know that what's happened for me in raising her is there. It was really years where I didn't skip one day without feeling um, gratitude. Uh,
Yeah.
so the parent, this is something that I heard many years ago, but it's it's because of all that loss, because of infertility, that 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 you have this child, and so it's really
Right. I've seen
it's
that. I've heard of it. It's incredible.
yeah, and so you don't realize you think that there's a lot of stories about, wishing that this didn't happen to you, but you find out at the end that there's these blessings because it did happen to you. So there's a lot of blessings in this path, and you wouldn't be the parent that you eventually do become, or the person that you become, and
Yeah,
you certainly, if nothing else, learn a tremendous amount of empathy, and are
that's
able
right.
to really understand the pain of other people in a way that you couldn't unless you've experienced deep pain yourself.
It's true. I agree with you on that. And it's just it's almost like I feel like it's almost like a spiritual initiation. I
Yeah.
actually see it, I had talked to another practitioner and we were talking about like, why me? And she's like, why not me? And she's also gone through it and it's a calling, like it's
Hmm.
a life's calling and a spiritual calling and a calling on your soul in so many different ways. And I've heard the same thing, what you just said, from so many people, that after the fact, once everything's said and done, they feel so blessed and wouldn't change not one thing about their journey.
Hmm. Hmm. I've seen that in so many people, and even though for me it was like 6 years of what felt like torture, um,
Yeah.
I would say the same thing. I wouldn't change one thing about it. Every part of it, it was really these stepping stones.
Hmm.
Going from like losing pregnancies to IVF to then donor IVF to adoption and surrogacy, and every step was about letting go.
Mm,
And mindfulness is when you look at the practices, something I've heard is that they could all be reduced to letting go. And so
right.
it's infertility, and then finding a way of really knowing how to let go, is the biggest life lesson that you could possibly have.
Yeah, that sums it up. I mean, that's it's such a, in the end of the day, I think the most wise understandings, or even the most wise medicine, we talk about it. Everything that's really, really powerful is very simplistic. It's
Uh-huh.
very simple. It's not complicated.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. I've heard there's a couple quotes. One is, at the center of adversity is the seed of a greater good.
Yeah.
I really like that one. And I heard this in the mindfulness world. When you look at zero, you see nothing, but when you look through it, you see the world. And
Ooh.
yeah, I mean, what I really understand about that is that, when you look so specifically at something, there's just all this judgment that you're
Right.
that you're seeing, and it gets in the way. But when you look through all of this judgment, then you can see that
Clearly.
underneath it are the blessings. I've heard so many people, like, they've had cancer or something, really um, difficult has happened. They're in the hospital, and they just feel so much love and concern from the doctors and the nurses and the people who just rally behind them.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's this thing about, all of us have our true nature is basically good. That underneath it
Hmm.
all, we don't have to always be looking for how we could be a better person. We're already whole and complete as we are, with all of our insecurities and adversities and inadequacies. So coming back to our true self, and I think that these fertility challenges and the loss, and then how to work with it, is it's the journey, gives us the path.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I mean, is there a tip or inspiration that you would like to share with the listeners? Although you've really inspired me, even, just from this whole interview.
Well, you've inspired me too, Michelle. Um, well, yeah, I mean, I would say that if you open to possibilities, that you'll find what you're looking for. And just in terms of the fertility challenges, that I know that when I believe that if I just stayed on course, that a
Mhm.
child would come to me in one way or another, and
Yeah.
that however that child came to me, and I did open up to all the different ways. I mean, I was open to adoption and egg donation, and it just so happens that surrogacy is what worked. But
Right.
it's the being open to the possibilities. Um,
Yes.
so that would be kind of my final, sort of like, you can do it. Just stay open.
Those are beautiful words. You can't go wrong with that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
So, how can people find you?
Um, well, I have a website. It's my name, Janetti Marotta .com. I'm also on Instagram, and so it's just Instagram and Janetti Marotta. Uh, so those are the main ways. I have all of my contact information on my website, and going on Instagram, that directs you also to my website and contact information. My practice is in Palo Alto. My book is, if you go to my website, you can see my book. It's right on the front. You can order it there, or it's on Amazon. And I do think that one of the values of this book is that puts it puts all the different issues that come up in infertility, the couple's relationship, medical treatment, all the different options, how to a holistic way of living, diet, exercise, how to work with your thoughts, how to work with your emotions, how to work with family and friends. So it kind of targets the main areas and then applies the teachings and the practices of mindfulness. And so also in my book, which it's a very kind of systematic approach, so that you learn these practices in a way that grow upon one another. On my website, all of the meditations, and each meditation is 10 minutes. Every meditation that you learn in the book, you can follow on these guided meditations, which are located on my website. So,
That's great.
so everything, basically, just go to my website or go to Instagram, and it's all right there.
Awesome. This was absolutely fantastic. And one of my favorite topics, mindfulness, because I feel like it just really is life transforming and life enriching. And I think that whoever's listening to this would have benefited so much. And even though I've been, like I said before, I've been meditating for many, many years, but I've even been inspired by some of the things that you were saying today. And it really comes as a reminder of getting to a place of non-judgment, and how much more that opens up your life to just allowing the process to unfold.
That's a wonderful way of saying it. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I've gotten so much from talking with you, and I really appreciate being able to be on this podcast and sharing what I've learned, and what I've learned also from all the people that I work with. So this has all been a blessing.
Yeah, it's been truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye bye.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review. Reviews are everything to podcasters. You can find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com. And please be on the lookout for my online course and program. This course has emerged from everything that I've been using for the fertility program I now offer at my office. I wanted to consolidate all of my suggestions and coaching and put it into a form that anyone can purchase and use. It was important for me to encompass key fertility health factors, as well as guide you in implementing changes in your routine that are shown to boost fertility while being realistic and user-friendly. I will be offering this course with and without coaching. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com, where you can find the subscription form. I thank you so much for listening in and hope you have a beautiful day.